Hello and welcome to this week's Crossroads Politics here on WTHR Plus. I'm Dustin Grove.
And I'm Emily Longnecker. We start with a disturbing story involving several Indiana political candidates and racist text messages they say they received on the campaign trail.
They're now speaking out about what those messages said.
And talking about how it's impacting their approach to the race and how they approach safety.
I'm Demetrius running for States.
With the May primary just around the corner, Demetrius Hicks, who's running for a seat in the Indiana State Senate, is trying to reach as many potential voters as he can. Sometimes that's by knocking on doors like this.
You got my vote.
Other times it's by sending a mass text message like this one to thousands of voters, inviting them to a community forum.
If we're asking for your vote, we should be accessible to you as candidates.
But Hicks wasn't expecting one response he received recently to that community forum invite.
A particular response definitely was very hateful. Called us, Monica and myself, dumb.
Hicks says the campaign traced it back to the person responsible.
There's still racism in politics in 2026, and we have to do our part to push that back.
And they need to know that certain behaviors are simply not acceptable. So one is too many.
Monica White is running for Boone County Clerk.
I have a decade and a half of experience in human resources, strategic planning. I want to be weighted on that, not my skin tone.
Hicks and White aren't the only black candidates running for office to receive a text like this.
Shut up, you.
This is the text Claudette Peterson received after a recent text her campaign sent out to voters. Peterson is running for Pike Township trustee.
I was somewhat surprised. Pike has become a very diverse community overall.
But it's just very unfortunate that we're living in a time where this is still happening. And what we can't do is allow that negativity to stop us from getting out there, reaching out to people, and trying to ask people for their support.
Democratic State Representative Cherish Pryor says she's never experienced being called a racial slur while campaigning or knocking on doors.
I have always made sure that I've had someone with me. But we can't let fear control our lives, and we can't allow that negativity to stop us from getting in front of people, knocking on doors, because quite frankly, the vast majority of Hoosiers and people don't feel like that.
These candidates agree, but felt it was important to speak out against what happened.
I think it's going to take the larger community to call those bad actors out, to shame that type of behavior, because there's no place for hatred or bigotry.
All we're trying to do is help people.
And what happened, they say, only makes them more committed to their races to try and do that. The Greater Indianapolis NAACP issued a statement saying the racial slur used, quote, has no place in our communities or in the future we are building.
This week, we got our first look at the draft of Hailey's Law. The proposal honors Fisher's teen Hailey Busby, who was picked up, taken to Ohio, and killed earlier this year.
Her parents are continuing their push for change, hoping to make sure this never happens again. Hailey's parents have really been leading this effort in the middle of unimaginable grief.
What they're proposing is a new type of alert system for missing people who don't fit the current alert criteria. They plan to deliver Hailey's Law to Indiana lawmakers next week to be considered during next year's legislative session.
The law would create a pink alert system for missing persons and children who don't meet the standards for an amber or silver alert. It would activate with credible evidence of online grooming, contact with predators of any age, and indicators of trafficking or exploitation.
The law would also require a portal for pink alerts, displaying active pink alerts, pictures, and identifying information, and ways to submit tips to law enforcement. This draft says pink alerts would be only sent to people within a defined geographic radius, so not everybody in the whole state would get every one of them. The notifications will focus only on areas most relevant to the investigation and could expand if that threat expands, of course.
Hailey's dad, Bo, put this statement out on social media saying, quote, there is still far too much work to do and so much of it is long overdue. Our children deserve better. Now is the time where we can lead from the front, Indiana, and make this legislative session about protecting our children.
All of this, as we mentioned, is just a draft. It has yet to be officially introduced before lawmakers. Hailey's parents say they plan to do so next week.
And another big story this week, Indiana is putting autism therapy providers on notice.
Our news gathering partners at the Indiana Capital Chronicle report the head of the Family and Social Services Administration had a tense meeting with those providers, telling them they need to self-report anything they see that could be fraud, waste, or abuse by April 3rd. So why is this happening all of a sudden? Well, we know it follows a Wall Street Journal article earlier this month that highlighted an Indiana provider as an example of out-of-control costs billed to the Medicaid program for autism therapy, also known as applied behavior analysis therapy. Since then, a working group has recommended dozens of changes to Indiana's program. I talked with Capital Chronicle editor Nikki Kelly this week all about it. Nikki, I'm looking at this Wall Street Journal story. It says in 2023, Indiana paid one autism provider $29 million to provide ABA therapy to just 84 patients. That's eye-opening.
It is eye-opening, and it's certainly something people should be concerned about. But I do want to caution a few things, is that that's the extreme. There are many providers who, as usual in life, that aren't the bad actors and who are getting kind of broad brush strokes, Also, the state had virtually no guidelines or regulations back then. And so they have since completely changed the system to try to control that. So changes have already been put in place and are still going in place after a deep dive into why the system wasn't working. So obviously, it's an important issue, and the Wall Street Journal used that example to show the problems nationwide. But I do, like I said, just want to caution that Indiana has already made quite a few changes on ABA therapy, and that is one provider who clearly went to the extreme to take advantage of the situation.
And it seems like back when the state, the FSSA, was saying, was it last year, hey, we need to do something about these ballooning Medicaid costs. Is that when they started to take action and kind of create some rules and guardrails?
Yeah, in 2024, they had seen this massive uptick. It went up to like $611 million a year from $19 million a year. And then under then Governor Holcomb, he started they did drop down the rates some at some point. And during that example you gave, it was just the state would pay 40% of whatever you handed in a bill. So obviously a provider would just up, what their costs were, and the state wasn't arguing, they would just pay it. So obviously that got changed. Since then, the state has dropped down its rates. There was an ABA working group that came up with a bunch of recommendations when Governor Braun came in 2025. They've been implementing those, including sort of lifetime caps on the number of hours a child can get ABA therapy, new accreditation rules for providers who previously the state didn't require them to be accredited. So those are some examples of changes they're making.
Got it. And you can read the whole story online right now at the Indiana Capital Chronicle. Nikki Kelly, as always, thanks.
Thanks for having me.
For the second year in a row, Indiana state employees will get no pay raise. Our partners at the Indiana Capital Chronicle report the contingency fund that usually covers salary adjustments was cut by 90% in this year's state budget. That's despite a new revenue forecast that shows the state could end up taking in more money and accumulate a nearly $5 billion surplus by next year. The state budget director told the Indiana Capital Chronicle the executive branch's ability to give raises depends on having room within existing appropriated budgets, not the forecast. Despite the rosy forecast, appropriated budgets haven't changed. The race for Secretary of State now includes a Libertarian. The party nominated Lori Schillings of Carmel during their convention last weekend, and it is a crowded field. Current Republican Secretary of State Diego Morales and Democrat Bo Bai are among the candidates for their respective parties looking for their nomination. Former Indianapolis Mayor Greg Ballard announced he's running as an independent, and others include Democrat Blythe Potter and Republicans David Shelton and Jamie Reitenauer. Still ahead here on Crossroads Politics, the state addressing high energy costs. They've left a lot of families frustrated with their monthly bills. Those bills keep going up and up. Now there's a new push for affordability here in Indiana. But first, legalizing medical marijuana. Recent comments from Governor Braun reigniting the debate. We'll share suggestions from one state lawmaker who wants to see it happen.
Welcome back. Another big talker in local politics this week. Governor Mike Braun again addressing legalizing cannabis in Indiana for medical use.
According to State Affairs, the governor said when it comes to legalizing medical cannabis, he was, quote, kind of agnostic on that issue. And he went on to say, quote, when you've got 4 states surrounding you, you're probably going to have to address it. This week, I spoke with Republican State Representative Jim Lucas, a longtime supporter and sponsor of legislation to make cannabis legal here.
You know, next year will be a long session, budget year, and we're seeing some budget crunches, you know, not just in Indiana, but going on around the nation. And, you know, part of this that I've never looked at has been the cash flow part of it. But that's something you can't ignore because those numbers are pretty big. I think it's been estimated Indiana could possibly bring in $150 to $200 million on the recreational side. Now, I know the governor mentioned medical side, but you know, it's everything's on the table the way I see it.
And a big part of the conversation around legalizing marijuana is always enforcement, right?
During our conversation, Lucas pointed to other states that have already legalized marijuana and what we've seen play out there.
Play out for well, almost 2 decades around the nation. Once medical gets established, people realize that cannabis is not the boogeyman that people have made it out to be. And so they're like, you know, hey, we're doing this. Why not just go all the way and take advantage of it? The most important thing, I think, on the rec side is it gives you a chance to control it somewhat, you know, legalize it. And I say treat it like alcohol, you know, have to where you can only sell this with a retail license. If you're selling it, you know, outside of that retail license, you know, come down and just hammer the hell out of them.
When it comes to law enforcement, Governor Braun has said in the past and continues to say this conversation will have to include law enforcement. And he told me in an interview when he was a candidate that law enforcement has always been pretty cautious about the whole thing.
Absolutely. He has said that repeatedly and again said that any conversation would have to have their input before anything gets decided. Lucas told me he's hopeful that discussion can start in the next legislative session and he wants to see actual movement on potential legislation, unlike in years past.
My hope going into this session is now that Governor Braun has brought this issue out in the open, that we can have a discussion about it out in the open. In the past, and I got frustrated, you know, bringing in experts from all over the country, California, Colorado, you know, Florida, bring in these experts to come in and testify and give incredible testimony only for it to die in committee. You know, they'll give it a hearing, but no vote. And you can only play those cards so many times before people stop coming to Indiana because Indiana has become a laughingstock. So hopefully now, you know, people will start taking this seriously, that we have the governor at least come out and say he will give it a fair hearing. And that's my hope.
And we've heard over the years when this whole discussion began, it was one lawmaker here, one lawmaker there, and really we've seen a growing support on both sides of the aisle.
Yeah,
too.
a momentum growing, certainly.
And we've heard from other groups as well.
Right. I talked with the Indiana Normal this week. They're a group that has lobbied to have cannabis legalized and proposed an independent commission to oversee regulations.
In all states that have changed their laws and made legalization happen, the injuries in the workplace have went down, opioid deaths have went down. Youth access actually does go down in states that have regulated markets. In Indiana, we don't have a regulated market and minors directly have access, whereas in legalized states, that's not the case. And they have greater social education and awareness around cannabis that doesn't create this misinformation.
You know, veterans groups also, there are several veterans groups that are behind this push to legalize. Several veterans that I've talked to over the years have said, you know, they go to neighboring states to get cannabis to manage their PTSD and some of the pain issues that they deal with. So they have been active in lobbying the governor and lawmakers to finally legalize medical cannabis here in Indiana.
The conversation continues.
It certainly
we'll
does.
Take it up again at the next session.
Yep.
All right.
Affordability, it's the big topic of conversations as costs rise across the country, especially when it comes to electricity, and answers could come soon if you're wondering why your energy bill is through the roof.
A lot of frustration there. It was a major focus for lawmakers in the latest legislative session. The Indiana Utility Regulatory Commission met just this week with the 5 largest electric companies in the state to get some answers.
Yeah, all day long, the Indiana Utility Regulatory Commission asked AES, Duke, CenterPoint Energy, Indiana Michigan Power Company, and Northern Indiana Public Service Company on how usage relates to your bill and the steps these companies can take to lower costs for customers, as Ella Rhodes reports.
High energy bills are hitting Hoosiers hard. The Indiana Utility Regulatory Commission set out to find why. IURC Chairman Andy Zay didn't seem pleased with what he heard.
There are opportunities for plans, but I'm not certain I've heard anything tangible that is really going to hit Main Street and our ratepayers. And that concerns me.
Each company laid out how they determine rates and customer affordability in front of the IURC and the Indiana Office of Consumer Counselor. Then came the commission's question.
Yes, the question I have is
from transparency and customer support to lobbying budgets.
Hey, we speak in acronyms, we speak a lingo and a culture that a lot of people don't understand. And customers deserve better than that. We need to be out amongst the communities, talking to people, explaining to them what's going on with energy.
State lawmakers sat in on the hearing too, including Representative Cherish Pryor.
Really disappointed that more has not been put on the table to try to talk about decreasing the rates in a significant way.
The IURC says this inquiry is just the start. Next, they will go across the state to hear from customers.
People are literally hurting out there, and the answer simply can't be to just lower your thermostat to 65 degrees and be cold.
Chairman Zay says they hope to release the findings from the inquiry in 30 to 60 days.
We want our utilities at the most affordable rate possible, but as a state, we want to meet the economic development of the future. And in a simple equation, those don't add up. So what is the coefficients? What are the efficiencies?
Hoping the warmer weather will provide some relief on your energy bill in the meantime.
And that was Ella Rhodes reporting. BlackRock's acquisition of AES also came up during the inquiry. AES says that it will not affect consumers' energy bills. We asked Chairman Zay if he trusts that. He said he can't answer that question.
Well, after the meeting, Governor Braun released a statement. It read in part, "I want to strongly praise Chairman Zay and the entire commission for taking a hard stand and demanding real accountability. They asked the tough questions and made it clear that automatic pass-throughs and unchecked hikes are no longer acceptable." Residential electric rates have climbed 28.9% since 2014, far outpacing inflation and our peer states. Hoosier families have had enough. I will personally review the results of Tuesday's hearing and the full listening sessions to identify every additional way we can deliver real relief to ratepayers. If you're interested in attending one of the IURC's listening sessions, you can head over to WTHR.com and find the exact time and locations.
TSA agents are struggling to make ends meet amid that partial government shutdown.
Yeah, they've missed 3 paychecks now, and for some Hoosier workers, the situation is getting dire.
I don't want to have to spend my entire savings just to, afford to keep living.
Still ahead on Crossroads, the local nonprofit now helping support TSA workers while lawmakers in D.C. debate a deal. The funding fight for immigration and customs enforcement may ironically send ICE agents to more American cities.
The Department of Homeland Security was not funded, hasn't been, because of this ongoing stalemate in Congress the last couple of weeks. ICE still had money, but agencies like TSA did not, and that led to an increasing number of TSA agents to miss work as they hadn't been paid in months.
In response, ICE agents have been deployed to a number of American airports to help the TSA agents. Indianapolis is not one of the cities getting ICE agents. Airport officials say they are having a lower absentee rate for TSA agents than some other airports.
And they credit some of that to outreach from the Indianapolis community, showing support for the unpaid TSA workers. Brandon Schaff reports on how a local food bank is lending a hand.
Passengers continue to go through the security checkpoint here at Indianapolis International Airport throughout this partial government shutdown, and that means that TSA employees are showing up and making sure they can get through and to their flights. But it also means that those employees are working without pay, and they're looking for ways to offset those lost wages for now. For the third week in a row, Gleaners Food Bank hosted a food distribution for TSA employees on Monday. Taylor Desert has worked for the TSA for 7 years, and her last full paycheck came on February 14th when the shutdown began.
Realistically, once we hit 60 days is probably when I'm going to have to start looking for another job. I don't want to have to spend my entire savings just to, afford to keep living. And then, if we don't reopen and I no longer have savings, that paycheck's not going to do anything. That's just going to be helping me dig out of the hole.
With no paycheck for weeks, Desert says it's causing uncertainty as she weighs how to pay for her medical expenses. For now, she paused getting her wisdom teeth removed. She's not the only one feeling the effects of the shutdown. So far, more than 100 TSA employees came for help at Gleaners.
There's probably about 350 TSA employees at the airport who would be eligible, and if you think about a third of them find the need to take charitable food, that's a significant impact.
Gleaners CEO Fred Glass says they'll keep doing distributions for TSA employees while the shutdown continues. Back at the airport, travelers are concerned for the TSA workers, helping keep them safe during their travel day.
It shouldn't be this way. Why we're doing this almost boggles your mind. Definitely pray that it'll end soon and these guys get back getting paid and maybe a little extra bonus or something.
In Indianapolis, Brandon Schaff, 13 News.
And that does it for this week's episode of Crossroads Politics. I'm Emily Longnecker.
And I'm Dustin Grove. For all of us here at 13 News, thanks so much for watching. We hope to see you next time.